The brass key was still there, taped behind the frame of my mother's portrait. My fingers trembled as I peeled away 60 years of dust and adhesive, the metal cold against my palm. Exactly where I'd hidden it the night I ran. I stood in the hallway of my childhood home, 77 years old now, breathing air that tasted of mildew and memories. The house had been locked since my brother Thomas died 3 months ago. No spouse, no children, just a lawyer's letter informing me that the property was mine. The runaway daughter who'd vanished at 17, leaving nothing but an empty bed and a note I'd hidden somewhere in this tomb of a house. That note was why I'd returned. Not for inheritance or closure, but because I needed to remember what I'd written to myself, what truth I'd buried in these walls before my disappearance. The wooden floors groaned under my weight as I moved through rooms that seemed smaller than memory painted them. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through yellowed curtains. Everything was wrong, furniture covered in sheets like ghosts, family photographs turned face down on the mantelpiece. Thomas had lived here alone for decades, preserving our parents' house like a museum no one visited. Or perhaps a crime scene. My hand found the banister, worn smooth by generations of hands sliding along its length. How many times had I raced up these stairs, fleeing my father's voice, my mother's silence. Now I climbed slowly, each step deliberate, my knees protesting the effort. The second floor waited, doors closed like sealed confessions. The first room had been Thomas's. I pushed open the door to find it exactly as it had been when we were children. Baseball trophies on shelves, school pennants on walls, everything suspended in 1960s amber. But the bed was made with military precision, and there were pill bottles on the nightstand. He'd been sleeping in his childhood room at the end. The thought made something twist in my chest. My parents' bedroom door stood ajar. I couldn't bring myself to enter, not yet. Instead, I moved to the door at the end of the hall. My room. The doorknob turned easily, but the door stuck, swollen with humidity and neglect. I pressed my shoulder against it, and it gave way with a sound like breaking bones. The room exhaled stale air, and something else lavender, faint but unmistakable. My mother's sachet bags, still hanging in the closet after 6 decades. The bed was made, a layer of dust turning the white coverlet gray. My desk sat by the window, empty except for a lamp with a cracked shade. They'd removed everything personal, every trace of the girl who'd lived here, except they hadn't known about the note. I crossed to the closet, my footsteps muffled by a braided rug I'd picked out for my 15th birthday. Inside, my winter coat still hung like abandoned skins. I pushed them aside, revealing the back wall where I'd carefully pried loose a board years before discovering I would need it. Behind that board was a metal box, the kind that once held Christmas cookies. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Inside, the note, folded into a small square, and beneath it, something I'd forgotten. A photograph. The photo showed 3 people standing in front of this house. A man in a dark suit, unsmiling. A woman in a floral dress, her hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl. But the girl's face had been cut out, leaving a neat oval hole where features should have been. I stared at it, my mind struggling to assemble fragments of memory. This was our family portrait, taken 2 weeks before I ran. I remembered the photographer, remembered the way my father had gripped my shoulder too tight, leaving bruises. But I didn't remember cutting out my own face. The note was written on lined paper, torn from a school notebook. The ink faded, but still legible. My 17-year-old handwriting, all loops and urgency. If you're reading this, you came back. Don't trust what they told you about that night. Check the attic, the black trunk, under the lining. You were right about everything. They were never your parents. I sat down hard on the bed, dust rising in a cloud around me. Never your parents. The words made no sense, and yet something deep in my belly recognized them as true. A knowledge I'd carried but never examined. Like a stone in your shoe, you grow so accustomed to that, you forget you're limping. The attic. I'd need the key. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, the same weight and rhythm I remembered from childhood. But that was impossible. My father had been dead for 30 years, my mother for 25, Thomas for 3 months. The house was empty. The footsteps paused at the landing. I held my breath, suddenly 17 again, hiding from consequences I couldn't name. The brass key bit into my palm where I clutched it. I knew you'd come back, a voice said from the hallway. Female, elderly, familiar, but not immediately placeable. Thomas said you would, once he was gone. Said you'd come for the truth. I stood, my legs unsteady. Who's there? A woman appeared in my doorway, late 70s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a house dress that could have come from my mother's closet. It took me a moment to recognize her. Margaret Holloway, who'd lived next door my entire childhood. She'd been young then, maybe 30. Mathematics made her ancient now. Hello, Sarah, she said, using a name no one had called me in 60 years. I'd been Lisa for so long that Sarah felt like another person entirely, a girl who died the night she ran. Mrs. Holloway. My voice came out rough. How did you... I have a key. Thomas gave it to me years ago. Asked me to look after things. I've been waiting for you to show up since the funeral. She studied me with eyes that had gone milky with cataracts. You look like her, you know. Your real mother. The words hit like cold water. What are you talking about? She moved into the room uninvited, her fingers trailing along the furniture, leaving lines in the dust. Thomas never knew. Your parents, the people who raised you, they made sure of that. But I knew. I was there the night they brought you home. You were 3 years old, and you were screaming. That's not possible. There are baby pictures. Of a baby. Could be anyone. The real Sarah died when she was 2. Meningitis. Your mother, Helen, she went mad with grief. Your father found you somehow, brought you home, told everyone Helen had been visiting her sister, that the illness had been kept quiet to avoid scandal. Margaret sat on my desk chair, which creaked under her weight. But I knew Helen hadn't gone anywhere. I watched her tend her garden all through that summer, childless and broken. Then suddenly, there you were. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile this information with my memories. I remembered being 5, 6, 7 in this house. I remembered birthdays and Christmases, skinned knees and bedtime stories. But before that, nothing. A blank wall where early childhood should have been. You're lying, I said, but the words lacked conviction. Margaret shrugged. Check the attic like your note says. Thomas never went up there, bad lungs. Haven't been touched since your parents died. She stood, joints popping. I'll be downstairs. We have more to discuss, you and I. About why you really ran. About what happened that night. She left, her footsteps receding down the stairs. I remained frozen, the photograph with its missing face still in my hand. The brass key seemed to pulse with heat in my other palm. The attic access was in the ceiling of the hallway, a pull-down ladder that shrieked when I tugged the cord. I climbed carefully, testing each rung, aware of my age in every movement. The attic was stifling, late afternoon sun baking the roof. Boxes and furniture draped in sheets created a maze of shadows. I pulled the chain on a bare bulb, washing everything in harsh yellow light. The black trunk sat against the far wall, padlocked. The brass key slid in smoothly, the lock clicking open as if it had been used yesterday. Inside, layers of clothing, women's dresses from the 1940s, men's suits, baby clothes yellowed with age. I felt along the edges until I found the lining Margaret had mentioned loose at one corner. I pulled it back. Papers, dozens of them, bundled with string. I pulled them out carefully, my hands trembling. The first was a certificate of death. Sarah Marie Coleman, age 2 years, 3 months, cause of death, bacterial meningitis. Date, June 15, 1961. The second was a newspaper clipping from the Riverside Children's Home, dated August 1961. Fire claims 3 lives, 1 child missing. The article described a nighttime fire at the orphanage, how 3 staff members had died trying to evacuate the children. 1 child was unaccounted for, a girl, approximately 3 years old, no name given, ward of the state. The third document made my blood run cold. It was a handwritten letter in my father's No, James Coleman's distinctive script. The exchange is complete. The child shows no memory of before. Helen has accepted her completely. The resemblance is fortunate dark hair, green eyes, small build. We will call her Sarah. No one questions it. The staff who knew the girl died in the fire, which solves that problem. The money has been transferred to the account you specified. We will have no further contact. There was no signature, no addressee. I sat back on my heels, dust swirling in the light around me. I'd been purchased, stolen, given a dead child's name and life. The parents I'd feared and fled from weren't my parents at all. Just people so desperate to fill a void that they'd taken someone else's child. But that didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why I'd run at 17, or what had happened that night that Margaret mentioned. I continued through the papers, finding medical records for the real Sarah, photographs of a toddler who did look remarkably like the few pictures I'd seen of myself at that age. Then, at the bottom of the stack, another note. This one in my mother's Helen's handwriting. She knows. God help me. She knows what we did. James says she's too young to remember, but I see it in her eyes. She looks at me like I'm a stranger. Sometimes she says things, mentions places we've never been, people we don't know. James wants to send her away, says it's the only solution. But I can't lose her again. I won't survive it. The note was dated 1964. I would have been 6, according to their timeline. Old enough to have fragments of memory from before. Young enough that they'd eventually fade. Become dreams. Become nothing. I heard footsteps on the ladder. Margaret's grey head appeared through the opening. "Found what you were looking for?" she asked. "You knew all along. Why didn't you ever say anything?" She pulled herself up with surprising agility for her age, settling on a dusty ottoman. What good would it have done? You were a child. They were the only parents you knew by the time you were old enough to understand. And they weren't bad people, just broken ones. They lied to me my entire life. Yes, but they also fed you, clothed you, sent you to school. They weren't cruel, were they? Just cold, I finished, distant, Like they were afraid to love me too much. Or afraid you'd remember and leave them. Margaret picked up one of the photographs. You did start to remember, though. When you were 16, 17. That's what caused the problems. I thought back to those last years in the house. The fights that seemed to come from nowhere. My father's increasing paranoia. My mother's tears. And the dreams, vivid dreams of smoke and screaming, of hands reaching through flames. The fire, I said. I was in the fire at the orphanage. Margaret nodded. You had burn scars on your back. Helen told everyone you'd pulled a pot of boiling water off the stove as a toddler. But I saw them once when you were swimming. Those weren't splash burns. The memories came in fragments, like photographs scattered on water. Heat, smoke. Someone carrying me, their face obscured. Not toward the exit, but away from it. Into the night, into a car. I'd been taken during the chaos of the evacuation. Whether by someone who worked there or an opportunist, I'd never know. What happened the night I left? I asked. My note said not to trust what they told me. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. There was another fire. The words hung in the stifling air of the attic. Another fire. My skin prickled with sweat, and something else, recognition maybe, or the body's memory of trauma. Where? I asked, though somehow I already knew. Next door. My house. Margaret's fingers worried at the hem of her dress. Your father, James. He was convinced you were going to expose them. You'd been asking questions, demanding to see birth certificates, early photos. You'd gone to the library, researching the orphanage fire. He was terrified. I remembered those weeks before I ran the research. The growing certainty that something fundamental about my life was a lie. I'd felt like a detective in my own existence, following clues that led nowhere good. The fire started around midnight, Margaret continued. I woke to smoke, managed to get out with my children, lost everything else. The official cause was faulty wiring, but I saw James in his yard afterward, saw the gas can he was trying to hide. He tried to burn your house down? Why? Because I was the only witness, the only one who knew you weren't really Sarah. He thought if I was gone, the secret would be safe. She laughed bitterly. Joke was on him. I'd already decided to keep my mouth shut. What was done was done. But paranoia made him stupid. So I ran because you saw him that night. You told me later, years later when you called to check on Thomas. You saw him with the gas can, saw him running back from my burning house. You confronted him, and well, the memory slammed into me like a physical force. James grabbing my arm, twisting it behind my back. His voice in my ear. You say one word and you'll end up just like her. House fires happen all the time. Tragic accidents. I'd believed him. Believed he would kill me to keep his secret. I packed that night, I said, the words coming slowly as memories reassembled. Took money from Helen's purse, some jewelry I could pawn. Wrote the note to myself because I was afraid. Afraid I'd forget, or convince myself it hadn't happened. Smart girl, though you left out the most important part. I looked at her sharply. What do you mean? The reason they needed you so badly. The reason they couldn't just adopt legally, go through proper channels. Margaret stood, moved to another trunk, this one unlocked. She pulled out a leather journal. This was Helen's. She gave it to me before she died, asked me to keep it safe. Said someday, someone might need to know the truth. She handed me the journal. Helen's handwriting filled page after page, dated entries going back to 1959. I flipped through, catching fragments. The baby moves constantly now. James says we'll name her Sarah. The nursery is perfect. She was pregnant, I said. When the real Sarah was born, Helen was actually pregnant. For the first and only time, they'd tried for 10 years. When it finally happened, they were overjoyed. Then Sarah came early, too early. Lived for 2 years against all odds. Then the meningitis took her. Margaret's voice was gentle. But here's what nobody knew. Helen was pregnant again when Sarah died. I kept reading, finding the entries from summer 1961. Helen's grief was raw on every page, but threaded through it was hope. Another child coming, a miracle after so much loss. Then the entries stopped abruptly in July, resuming in September with a single line. James brought her home today. We're calling her Sarah. She lost the second baby, I said. Miscarried the same week they buried Sarah. The double loss broke something in her mind. James was desperate. He'd already watched his wife attempt suicide twice. So when he heard about the orphanage fire, about children unaccounted for, Margaret shrugged. He saw an opportunity to steal a child, to save his wife. And it worked in a way. Helen lived another 40 years because of you. Broken, guilty, strange, but alive. I closed the journal, my hands trembling with rage or grief. I couldn't tell which. And Thomas? Did he ever know? Never. He was 12 when Sarah died, away at summer camp when you arrived. They told him his sister had been sick but recovered, that she might seem different because of the illness. He was a child. He believed what his parents told him. Margaret pulled out another document from the trunk. But he left this for you. It was an envelope with my name, my assumed name, Lisa written on it in Thomas's shaky handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper. I know you're not coming to my funeral, but maybe someday you'll come home. I need you to know that I figured it out. Not everything, but enough. You weren't our sister, but you were my sister. For 14 years, you were the best thing in this house. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. I'm sorry for whatever they did that made you run. The house is yours now. Do with it what you will. Find peace, if you can. T. The tears came then, 60 years of them, flooding out in the dusty attic while Margaret sat quietly beside me. Thomas had known. Maybe not the details, but he'd known I wasn't Sarah, and he'd loved me anyway. He'd been the only real thing in a house built on lies. When I could speak again, I asked, "Why did you call me after I left?" I didn't. You called me about 6 months after you ran. Wanted to make sure I was alive, that the fire hadn't... You were terrified James would come after you? Finish what he'd started? I told you he'd had a heart attack 3 months after you left. The stress, the guilt, it killed him quick. Helen lasted longer, but was never the same. Institutionalized for the last 5 years. And Thomas stayed, all alone in this house. He was looking for something. Spent years going through their things, trying to understand. I think he found some of it. Enough to know you weren't who they said you were. But he could never find where you'd gone. You disappeared completely. I had. Lisa Marie Walsh, built from forged documents and careful lies. Living in Portland, then Seattle, then San Francisco. A husband who knew nothing of my past. 2 children who believed their grandparents died before they were born. A life constructed as carefully as the one James and Helen had built for their stolen daughter. "There's one more thing," Margaret said. She pulled out a small box from her pocket. Thomas asked me to give this to you if you ever came back. Inside was a locket, tarnished silver, clearly old. I opened it to find 2 photographs, one of Thomas as a young man, the other of me at maybe 15, smiling. The real smile, not the performed one from family portraits. He wore it every day, Margaret said. Said you were the only family that mattered. I climbed down from the attic, my legs shaking from more than exertion. Margaret followed, somehow steadier despite her age. The house felt different now, not the prison of my youth, but a crime scene preserved in amber. Every room containing evidence of lives built on deception. In the kitchen, Margaret made tea with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years in this space. I looked after Thomas, she said, filling a kettle that had probably been Helen's. These last 10 years especially, when his health started failing. He never married, you know. Said he couldn't trust anyone enough to let them close. Because of what our parents did? Because of what losing you did to him? He was 26 when you vanished. Came home from college to find his sister gone, his father dead from a heart attack, his mother catatonic with grief. He never left again. The guilt sat heavy in my chest. I'd thought only of my own escape, never what wreckage I'd left behind. I couldn't take him with me. He would have tried to bring me back, convince me I was wrong about James. You were 17. You did what you had to do to survive. Margaret set a cup in front of me. The china pattern, familiar roses, and gold trim. Helen's best set. But Thomas never stopped hoping you'd come home. He kept your room exactly as it was, just in case. Except for my things, my clothes, my books. Those are in the basement, boxed and labeled. He couldn't bear to look at them, but couldn't throw them away either. She studied me over her cup. What will you do now that you know? It was a question I hadn't let myself consider. The truth was supposed to fix something, supposed to make sense of the fractures in my history. Instead, it had only revealed more damage, more loss. I don't know. I have a life in California. Children who think their mother's name is Lisa, who've never heard of Sarah Coleman. And will they? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. We both froze. No one should know I was here. I hadn't told anyone I was coming, had driven a rental car, paid cash for everything. Margaret went to answer it while I waited, my hand unconsciously going to the locket at my throat. Voices in the hallway, then footsteps. A man appeared in the doorway, mid-50s, expensive suit, carrying a briefcase. He had Thomas's eyes. "Mrs. Walsh?" he said, using my married name. "I'm David Coleman. Thomas was my uncle, I suppose, though we never met." The words didn't compute. Thomas didn't have children. No, but James had a brother, my grandfather. We lost touch with this side of the family after you disappeared. He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here about the estate. The lawyer said Thomas left everything to me." He did. But there are complications. My grandfather always insisted that James stole something valuable from the family. Documents suggest it might have been quite significant. We believe you might have taken it when you left. I almost laughed. I took $40 and some costume jewelry. "And a key," he said, eyeing the brass key I still clutched. "That key, specifically." Margaret stepped forward. "I think you should leave, Mr. Coleman. I have a legal right to family property." "You have no rights here," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Thomas left the house to me. Whatever claim you think you have died with him. David's expression hardened. That key opens more than just the attic trunk. My grandfather spent 30 years trying to track it down. It belongs to a safety deposit box that James emptied the night before you were acquired. The word hung in the air like an accusation. You knew, I said. Your family knew what James did. We suspected. A 3-year-old girl appears out of nowhere just months after Sarah dies? My grandfather did the math. But James cut all contact, threatened legal action if anyone came near. Then you vanished and the key with you. What was in the box? Family inheritance, bonds, certificates, items that belonged to the entire Coleman line, not just James's branch. Worth quite a bit now, I imagine. I stood, the key cutting into my palm. Get out. I'll get a court order. Try it. The voice that came out of me was one I'd cultivated over 40 years in business, the one that had built Lisa Walsh into someone formidable. I was a stolen child, trafficked and sold to your uncle. Want to open that investigation? I'm sure the FBI would be fascinated, even after all these years. Wire fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, amazing, how there's no statute of limitations on some crimes. David's face went pale. He grabbed his briefcase, backing toward the door. This isn't over. Yes, it is. I followed him to the hallway, Margaret close behind. Your family stole my childhood, my identity, my entire life. You'll get nothing more from me. He left, the door slamming behind him. I stood in the hallway, shaking with rage I'd suppressed for 60 years. Well, Margaret said mildly, that was interesting. I always wondered if the other Colemans would show up eventually. You knew about them? Suspected. James was too paranoid to just be hiding you. There had to be money involved, something worth protecting. She headed back to the kitchen. The key probably does open something valuable. Question is, do you want to find it? I looked at the brass key, this small piece of metal that had traveled with me through 6 decades, hidden in apartments and houses across the country, always kept close but never examined. I'd thought it was just about the trunk, about the truth. But maybe 17-year-old me had known more than I remembered. There's something else, I said slowly. Something I'm not remembering. Margaret nodded. The night you left, you were gone for 3 hours before you actually ran. Thomas told me later. He heard you leave around midnight, heard you come back at 3, then leave again for good at 4. Where did you go? The memory was there, just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. Somewhere important. Somewhere that required a key. The bank, I said suddenly. James had a safety deposit box at First National. He went there every month, always alone. But that night, the memory clicked into place. I followed him once, saw him enter the bank after hours. He knew someone who worked security, let him access his box outside business hours. The night I left, I went there first. How did you get in? The security guard, Mr. Patterson. His daughter was in my class. He was working that night, saw me outside crying. I told him my father had sent me, that it was an emergency. I could see it now, clear as daylight. He let me in, let me access the box. James had been so paranoid about keeping the key at home that he never considered I might find it. What was inside? Money, bonds, and I pressed my fingers to my temples, forcing the memory. Birth certificates, not just Sarah's others. 3 other children, all who had died young, all from different states. Margaret's teacup clattered against the saucer. He was collecting dead children's identities? I think so. I took them all, along with about 10,000 in bonds. Hid them somewhere before I came back to pack. But where? We spent the next hour retracing my 17-year-old logic, but the location remained elusive. I'd been smart enough to hide evidence that could destroy the Colemans, but too traumatized to remember where. The sun was setting by the time we gave up searching my room for clues. Margaret had gone home, promising to return in the morning. I sat alone in the kitchen, the house creaking around me, with sounds I'd once known by heart. Every settling board, every pipes complaint had been the soundtrack to my stolen childhood. I called my daughter in California, told her I'd extended my trip. She didn't question it. I'd been vague about why I was traveling, mentioned something about visiting an old friend. The lie came easily, as they all had over the years. My children knew their mother as Lisa Walsh, successful real estate developer, widow of Robert Walsh, daughter of parents who died young. Every biography fact, carefully chosen, documented, made real through repetition. But sitting in Helen's kitchen, I wondered what it had cost me, this constant performance. My marriage had been good, but never quite honest. Robert had sensed the walls I kept up, the history I wouldn't share. My children loved me, but sometimes looked at me like I was a stranger, exactly as Helen had described in her journal. The fabrication had worked too well, had become a prison of its own. I climbed the stairs again, drawn to my parents' James and Helen's room. This time I entered, switching on the overhead light. The room was frozen in the 1990s, when Helen had been institutionalized. Faded wallpaper, heavy furniture, the smell of old wood and loneliness. Thomas had kept it like a shrine, though to what I couldn't say. The family that never was? The lies that killed them all in different ways? Their dresser still held their things. I went through the drawers, finding the detritus of ordinary lives' reading glasses, handkerchiefs, a watch that had stopped at 3:17. In Helen's jewelry box, I found her wedding ring and a saint's medal for lost children. The irony was almost too much. In James's drawer, beneath folded undershirts, my fingers hit something solid. A small notebook, the kind he'd always carried for business. I opened it to find columns of numbers, dates, amounts. Payments received, every month for 14 years, starting just after my arrival. The amounts increased over time, stopping only with his death. Someone had been paying them. For me? For their silence? The final entry included a phone number with the Chicago area code. I pulled out my cell phone, then hesitated. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and the number was 60 years old, but something made me dial. "Riverside Holdings," a recorded voice said. "Our office hours are—" I hung up, my heart pounding. Riverside, like the children's home that had burned. On impulse, I Googled the company. It existed, a property management firm that had been in business since 1955. The founder's name made my blood run cold, Patricia Riverside. According to the orphanage records, a Patricia Riverside had been the director who died in the fire. But this Patricia Riverside was very much alive, according to the company website. 91 years old, still chairman of the board. The photo showed a severe-looking woman with white hair and sharp eyes. Something about those eyes. I pulled out the photograph with my face cut out, studying the woman identified as Helen. Then I looked at the real Helen's photos from the journal. They were similar, but not identical. The woman in our family portrait had darker eyes, a stronger jaw. "My God," I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't the only one who'd been replaced. I tore through the rest of the drawers, finding more evidence. Helen's handwriting changed after 1961, became more controlled, less looped. Her signature on documents from before Sarah's death didn't match the ones from after. Photos of Helen from the 1950s showed a woman with a small scar on her left hand. The Helen I'd known had no such scar. The real Helen had died suicide, probably, after losing both daughters. James had replaced her just as he'd replaced Sarah. But while I was a random orphan, Helen had been deliberate, chosen, paid for by someone with resources and reach. I called Margaret, my hands shaking. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said when I told her. The Helen who came back wasn't the Helen who left. But I was young, and James was convincing. Said the grief had changed her, made her different. You knew. I suspected. But what could I do? Report that my neighbor's wife seemed different after a tragedy? That she'd forgotten things she should have known, knew things she shouldn't? Margaret sighed. I kept quiet, kept watch. She was good to you, in her way. Better than she was to Thomas. Because I was like her, a replacement, a fraud. Or because you were both victims of James's desperation. I thought about the woman I'd called Mother, her strange, distant affection, the way she'd sometimes look at me with something like recognition. We'd been two actors in James's elaborate play, neither knowing the other was performing too. Patricia Riverside, I said. She's connected to this. Be careful, Sarah. If she's been hiding for 60 years, she won't want to be found. But I was already packing my things, booking a flight to Chicago. I'd spent 60 years running from this truth. I was done running. The flight landed at O'Hare just after dawn. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through possibilities. Patricia Riverside had to be the Helen I'd known, the woman who'd raised me, who'd lived as Helen Coleman for 30 years. The timeline fit. The orphanage director dies in a fire that also conveniently destroys records. A few weeks later, Helen Coleman returns from her sister's house with a new daughter and a slightly different face that everyone attributes to grief. Riverside Holdings occupied the top floor of a building in the Loop. I'd called ahead, using my real estate credentials, to request a meeting about a potential property deal. Patricia Riverside, the secretary informed me, still came to the office every day, though she rarely took meetings. But the name Lisa Walsh from Walsh Development had gotten her attention. I waited in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. When the door opened, I knew immediately I was right. Despite the years, despite the silver hair and lined face, I recognized the woman who'd raised me. "Hello, Mother," I said. Patricia Riverside Helen Coleman stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then she closed the door behind her and sat down across from me. "I wondered if you'd ever figure it out," she said, her voice the same cultured tone I remembered, though with less of the fragility she'd performed as Helen. "You were always too smart for your own good. You paid James to take me, to replace his daughter. I paid James to take us both." She folded her hands, every inch the executive she'd become. I needed to disappear, and he needed a wife and child. It was a business arrangement that worked for 30 years. Why did you need to disappear? She smiled, a cold expression I'd never seen on Helen's face. Because Patricia Riverside had embezzled nearly $100,000 from the orphanage. Because she was about to be arrested. Because a fire that destroyed all the financial records was very convenient, even if it meant 3 people had to die. The words hung between us like a confession in a courtroom. You killed them. You started the fire. I saved you, she corrected. You were scheduled to be transferred to a state mental facility the next day. You'd been classified as disturbed, possibly autistic. In 1961, that meant a lifetime of institutions. I gave you a family instead. A fake family, a stolen life, a better life than you would have had. And don't be so righteous. You ran away and created your own fake life. We're not so different, you and I. She was right, and that was the worst part. I'd done exactly what she had, shed an identity that didn't fit, built a new one from lies and determination. Why me? I asked. Of all the children in that orphanage, why save me? For the first time, something human flickered across her face. Because you reminded me of someone. My sister, who died when she was 3. Dark hair, green eyes, stubborn chin. When I saw you, I thought, this one deserves better. And the others didn't. I couldn't save them all. I could barely save myself. She stood, moved to the window. I've done well for myself, as you can see. The money I took became seed capital. I built this company from nothing, employed hundreds of people, donated millions to charity. Does that balance the scales? I don't know. But it's what I did with the life I stole. And Thomas? Did he deserve to lose everything? Thomas was collateral damage. Like the real Helen, like James. Sometimes survival requires sacrifices. You're a monster. She turned back to me, and for a moment I saw Helen again, the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes, who'd held my hair when I was sick, who'd cried when I graduated high school, even though we both knew the graduation was built on lies. I'm a survivor, Patricia said, just like you. The only difference is I've made peace with what I did. Have you? Is that why you still go by Patricia Riverside, the name of a woman who supposedly died 60 years ago? I go by Patricia Riverside because I built something under that name. I earned it. She returned to her seat, studying me with those sharp eyes. What do you want, Sarah? Or do you prefer Lisa? Money? There's plenty of that. Answers? You have them now? Revenge? We're both too old for that. What did I want? I'd come looking for truth and found only deeper deceptions, crimes that spanned decades, a web of lies that had trapped everyone it touched. I want to know about the documents, I said. The birth certificates I found in James's safety deposit box, the other dead children. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. You found those? I did, and I hid them somewhere the night I ran. 3 other identities, all children who died young. Was he planning to replace Thomas too? Start fresh with a whole new family? No, those were mine. Insurance policies, you might say. Alternative identities, if I ever needed to run again. She smiled thinly. I taught James everything he knew about reinvention. He was a good student, but not creative enough to come up with the idea himself. So when I took them, you trapped me. I couldn't run without those documents, couldn't become someone new. I had to stay Patricia Riverside, had to build this life because you'd stolen my escape routes. She leaned forward. Where are they? I don't remember. Don't lie to me. I raised you, remember? I know your tells. She was right. The memory had come back during the flight, triggered by the altitude, or the pressure, or just the accumulation of truth. I knew exactly where my 17-year-old self had hidden those documents. They're in the house, I said, but I'm not telling you where. I could have you arrested. Theft. blackmail. And I could have you arrested for murder, kidnapping, fraud, and about a dozen other crimes. I stood. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer $5 million to accounts I designate, $2 million each for my children. They deserve something from this horror show. $1 million to preserve the Coleman House as a historical site, managed by a trust. Thomas deserves to be remembered. Blackmail, then. Reparations. For the childhood you stole, the family you destroyed, the lies you made me live. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, then laughed, a sound I'd never heard from Helen. You really are my daughter, aren't you? Not by blood, but by training. I taught you well. You taught me to survive, but I learned conscience somewhere else. From Thomas, probably. He was always too good for that house. She pulled out her phone, made a call. Within minutes, her assistant was drawing up transfer papers. $5 million, as requested. And then we're done? You'll leave the past buried? The past is never buried. It just stops bleeding eventually. While we waited for the papers, Patricia told me things I'd never known. How she'd actually grown fond of me over the years. How leaving when I did had probably saved my life, because James was growing more unstable, more dangerous. How Thomas had visited her once, years ago, seeking answers she couldn't give. He knew I wasn't really Helen, she said, but he never confronted me directly. Just asked if I knew where you'd gone, if you were safe. I told him you were. It was the only kindness I could offer. Did you love him at all, either of us? I loved you as much as I was capable of loving anyone, which wasn't much, I admit. Survival doesn't leave much room for sentiment. She signed the last paper. The money will be in your accounts by end of business today. I stood to leave, then turned back. The documents are in the wall behind the water heater in the basement. Inside a coffee can, wrapped in plastic. Your escape routes, if you still need them. Why tell me? Because I don't want to be like you, holding threats over someone's head for 60 years. Because I want to be done with this, all of it. Patricia stood too, and for a moment she looked fragile, elderly, almost human. What will you tell your children? The truth, eventually. They deserve that much. The truth. She said it like a foreign word. I've lived so many lies, I wouldn't recognize truth if it knocked on my door. It just did, I said, and left. The flight back to California took forever and no time at all. I sat in the window seat, watching America scroll by below. All those lives in all those houses, each containing their own secrets, their own deceptions, their own stolen children. My phone rang as we descended into SFO. Margaret. David Coleman was back, she said, with a court order. They're searching the house. Let them. They won't find anything that matters. You sound different, lighter somehow. I found her, the woman who raised me. She's alive, has been all along. Margaret was quiet for a moment. And she's just another damaged person who did terrible things to survive. Like James. Like me, in my own way. We're all criminals here, Margaret. The only innocent was Thomas. Thomas knew the truth and chose to love you anyway. That's not innocence, that's grace. After we hung up, I pulled out the locket Thomas had left me. His young face smiled out at me, frozen in time before everything went wrong. But he'd kept my picture too. The girl who wasn't really his sister, but whom he'd loved as one anyway. My daughter picked me up at the airport, concerned about my sudden trip, my vague explanations. In the car, I told her we needed to talk. that there were things about my past she deserved to know. She looked scared, probably imagining health diagnoses or financial problems. "I'm not who you think I am," I started, and then told her everything. The stolen childhood, the fake identities, the fire, the money that would soon be in her account. She pulled over halfway through, unable to drive while processing the dissolution of everything she'd believed about her mother. "So Grandma and Grandpa were real people, but not my real parents. And the woman who raised me is still alive, still out there, having built an empire on stolen money and false documents. And you're not Lisa Walsh?" I became Lisa Walsh, but I was born someone else, someone whose name I'll never know. I was Sarah Coleman for 14 years, but that was never real either. My daughter was crying now, not from sadness, but from the vertigo of revelation. My whole life is built on lies? No, your life is yours, built on your choices, your truths. My lies don't change who you are, but they change who you are. They explain who I am, why I could never talk about my childhood, why there were no family photos before a certain age, why I sometimes seem to be performing rather than living. I took her hand. "But my love for you, for your brother, for your father, that was never a performance. That was the truest thing about me." We sat in the car on the shoulder of 101, traffic rushing past, while my daughter recalibrated her entire understanding of her history. Finally, she asked, "What do we do now?" "Now we go home. I make dinner. Tomorrow we tell your brother. And then we live with the truth instead of running from it." "And the money? From that woman?" "Is yours and your brother's. Build something good with it. Something true." 3 months later, I stood again in the Coleman house. The historical trust had been established, the house cleaned and catalogued. Margaret had helped identify which items to preserve, which stories to tell. We'd decided, to be honest, to make it a museum about identity, about the lengths people go to become someone else, about the cost of deception. In the attic, in the trunk where I'd found the truth, we placed a new collection of documents. My real estate license under the name Lisa Walsh, my marriage certificate, photos of my children, my grandchildren, the real family built on a foundation of lies. And at the bottom, the note I'd written to myself at 17, still folded in its perfect square. David Coleman had found nothing in his search and eventually gave up his claim. Patricia Riverside never contacted me again, though I heard she'd finally retired, disappeared to somewhere warm where no one would ask about her past. The other documents, the stolen identities, remained in the coffee can behind the water heater. Some secrets deserved to stay buried. Thomas was interred in the family plot, between the graves of James and the real Helen. I had a stone erected for the real Sarah, too, acknowledging the child whose life I'd inadvertently lived. The inscription read, "Sarah Marie Coleman, 1959-1961, finally remembered." Standing in that cemetery, I realized I could choose my own inscription now. Not Sarah Coleman, the stolen child. Not Lisa Walsh, the invented woman. But something truer, harder to name. A survivor, like Patricia had said. But more than that, a woman who'd found her way back to a home that was never really hers. To face truths that were never really hidden. To forgive people who were never really family. The brass key still sits on my dresser in California, no longer hidden, no longer needed. Sometimes I pick it up, feel its weight, remember the girl who'd hidden it behind a portrait of a woman who wasn't her mother. That girl had known, somehow, that she'd need to come back. That the truth, however terrible, was better than the alternative, a life spent running from shadows, never knowing which ones were real. My daughter asked me once if I regret the years of deception, the false life I'd built. I told her the truth. I regret the necessity of it, but not the life itself. We are all, in some way, invented. The lucky ones get to choose their own invention. The rest of us make do with what we're given, then spend our lives trying to make it real. The house is a museum now, but it's still empty most days. People don't want to confront the possibility that their own lives might be built on similar deceptions. But sometimes someone comes, usually someone with their own questions about identity and belonging. They stand in the rooms where I learned to be Sarah, where Thomas learned to love a sister who wasn't his sister, where two damaged people tried to build a family from the ashes of their losses. And in my old room, now restored to how it looked in 1964, visitors can read the placard that tells part of the story. But only I know about the loose board in the closet, about the note a 17-year-old girl left for her older self, about the journey that brought her back to read it 60 years later. Some truths are too personal for museums, too raw for public consumption. I am 77 years old now, the same age Thomas was when he died. My children know my story. My grandchildren will learn it when they're older. The truth hasn't destroyed us. It's freed us from the weight of unspoken questions, the burden of performed normalcy. Sometimes I dream of fire, of hands reaching through smoke. But I don't know if those are real memories or just my mind trying to make sense of a past that will never fully reveal itself. I've learned to live with the not knowing, with the gaps that will never be filled, with the possibility that there are still secrets buried in that house, in Patricia's history, in the ashes of the Riverside Children's Home. But I've also learned this. We are more than the lies told about us, more than the names we're given or choose, more than the families we're born into or stolen by. We are the choices we make in the dark, the truths we tell when it matters, the love we offer, despite having every reason to withhold it. The note I left myself was right about one thing. I couldn't trust what they told me about that night. About any night, about who I was or where I came from. But I could trust what I chose to do next. The life I built from fragments. The family I created from love rather than blood. That's the real inheritance. The one Thomas left me along with the house. Not the truth about the past, but the possibility of a different future. A future where names matter less than intentions, where history matters less than hope, where even stolen children can grow up to find their own way home. The brass key opens nothing now. All the locks have been changed, all the secrets exposed. But I keep it anyway, a reminder of the girl who knew to save it, who knew she'd need a way back in, who trusted her future self to be brave enough to use it. She was right to trust me. It just took me 60 years to prove it. Thank you for reading. Sometimes the longest journeys are the ones that bring us back to where we started, finally able to see it clearly.